The sound of water rushing over stones had become Nora Grayson's only companion in the months since her husband died, leaving her alone in a land that showed no mercy to widows. She knelt by the river's edge outside Chloride, Arizona, in the scorching summer of 1882. Her hands raw from scrubbing the clothes of miners and drifters who paid her just enough to keep her small cabin from falling into someone else's hands. The sun beat down mercilessly on her back, turning her worn cotton dress into a second skin, and she wondered if this was all life had left for her at 23 years old. Owen Vance watched her from the ridge above, his dusty boots planted in the red Arizona soil as his horse, a sturdy sorrel named Dusty, shifted beneath him. He had been riding through for 3 days now, coming from a failed cattle drive in New Mexico that had left him with empty pockets and a heart even emptier. Something about the way the woman moved, the determined set of her shoulders despite the obvious exhaustion, made him pull his horse to a stop. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to want to be near another human being. But watching her struggle with a heavy blanket in the rushing water stirred something he thought had died along with his dreams of making something of himself. Nora felt the presence before she heard the horse's hooves on the rocks. She straightened quickly, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife she kept tucked in her boot. Too many men in this territory saw a woman alone as an invitation for trouble. When she turned, shielding her eyes from the sun, she saw him sitting tall in his saddle, his hat pulled low over his face. He was broad-shouldered and dusty from travel, and for a moment she considered grabbing her basket and running back toward town. "Did not mean to startle you, madam," Owen called down, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat and dismounted, leading his horse down the rocky slope with careful steps. "Just noticed you have been working there for a while. River can be dangerous alone." "I have been managing just fine," Nora replied, her chin lifting with the pride that had kept her going through 6 months of widowhood. Her dark hair had come loose from its bun, and she pushed it back with a wet hand, leaving a streak of river water across her forehead. "Do not need any help." Owen reached the bottom of the slope and stopped a respectful distance away. Up close, he could see the weariness in her eyes, the kind that came from carrying too much weight for too long. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with vanity, all natural strength and determination. "Never said you did," he replied, pushing his hat back to reveal a weathered face that looked older than his 26 years. "But I have been lonely on the trail for weeks now, and I thought maybe I could wash away your loneliness too, if you would let me help with those clothes." The words hung in the air between them, more forward than he had intended, but also more honest than anything he had said in months. Nora stared at him, her hand still gripping the wet fabric of a miner's shirt. There was something in his eyes that was not like the other men who came through Chloride, something that spoke of shared pain rather than predatory intent. "That is a bold thing to say to a stranger," she said finally, but her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. The loneliness he spoke of was something she understood all too well. There were nights when she lay in her cabin and wondered if anyone would even notice if she disappeared, if the river took her one day while she was washing clothes. "I know it," Owen admitted. He took another step closer, still maintaining enough distance to show respect. "But I figure out here in this hard country, we might as well speak plain. I am tired of being alone, and I am guessing you are too. Does not have to mean anything more than 2 people helping each other with a chore." Nora considered this, her practical nature warring with the part of her that had been starving for human connection. Finally, she nodded toward a pile of dirty clothes on the bank. "Those need washing. Water is cold and the current is strong. If you are serious about helping, you can start there." Owen felt something like relief wash through him. He tied Dusty to a nearby cottonwood tree and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms tanned dark by the sun and marked with old scars. He waded into the river without hesitation, gasping slightly at the cold shock of the water. "Got a name?" he asked as he picked up a heavy pair of denim trousers. "Nora Grayson," she said, watching him work with a critical eye. Most men she knew would not lower themselves to women's work, but he attacked the task with the same straightforward determination he seemed to approach everything. "You." "Owen Vance. Come from Texas originally, but I have been drifting for about 5 years now. Came to Arizona thinking I would make my fortune in cattle, but that did not work out like I planned." They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the rushing water and the rhythmic slap of wet fabric against rocks. Nora found herself sneaking glances at him, noting the way his hands, though rough and large, were surprisingly gentle with the clothes. He did not complain about the cold water or the tedious nature of the work, just kept washing with steady focus. "You said you were lonely," Nora said eventually, wringing out a shirt with practiced efficiency. "Running from something or toward something?" Owen paused, considering the question. It was too perceptive, cutting right to the heart of things. "Both, maybe. Lost my family to fever when I was 21. My parents, 2 younger sisters. I was away on a cattle drive, and when I came back they were already in the ground. Could not stay in that house after that, so I left. Been moving ever since, thinking maybe if I kept going I would find some place that felt like home again." The pain in his voice was raw and real, and Nora felt her defenses cracking. "My husband died 6 months ago," she heard herself say. "Mining accident up in the hills. They brought him back in pieces. We had only been married a year, and I barely knew him if I am being honest. It was a marriage of convenience, 2 lonely people trying to make a life. But when he died, I realized I was more alone than I had been before I married him." Owen looked up at her, really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes. Not pity, but understanding. "That is a hard kind of loneliness," he said quietly. "The kind where you are lonely even when you are with someone." "Yes," Nora whispered, surprised by the tears that suddenly threatened. She had not cried since the funeral, had not allowed herself to feel anything beyond the need to survive. Exactly that. They continued working as the sun climbed higher, the heat becoming oppressive. Owen shrugged out of his vest and then his shirt, working in just his undershirt, which quickly became soaked and transparent. Nora tried not to notice the way his muscles moved under the wet fabric, tried not to think about how long it had been since she had felt any kind of physical attraction to anyone. Her marriage had been chaste and dutiful, never passionate, and she had assumed that part of her was simply broken. "Why did you really stop?" she asked as they hauled the heavy wet laundry onto the bank to dry. "You could have ridden right past." Owen straightened, water dripping from his hair and clothes. The honest answer seemed important, so he gave it. "Because you look the way I feel. Like you are carrying the whole world on your shoulders and there is nobody to share the weight. And because I am tired, Nora. Tired of drifting, tired of being alone, tired of acting like it does not matter. When I saw you down here, I thought maybe this was the universe giving me a chance to do something good for once, to connect with another human being even if just for an hour or two." The vulnerability in his words struck her like a physical blow. She stood there with her wet dress clinging to her legs, her hair a wild mess around her face, and for the first time in 6 months, she felt something other than numb resignation. "It has been more than an hour," she said softly. "Sun is nearly at its peak." "So it is," Owen replied, not moving. "Should I go?" Nora looked at the pile of clean laundry, then at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and somehow seen right into her soul. She thought about her empty cabin, about another night of loneliness stretching ahead of her. "I have bread and cheese at my cabin," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "Not much, but if you are hungry, it is better than trail rations." The smile that broke across Owen's face transformed him, making him look younger and infinitely less world-weary. "I would like that very much." They gathered the wet clothes and hung them over the rocks and low branches to dry in the punishing sun. Owen insisted on carrying the heavy basket of clean laundry, and they walked together up the dusty path toward Chloride. The town was small and rough, the kind of place that existed only because of the silver mines in the surrounding hills. Wooden buildings lined a single main street, their paint long since stripped away by wind and sand. Miners and cowboys moved between the saloons and boarding houses, and Nora felt their eyes on her as she walked with Owen. "People will talk," she said quietly as they passed the general store. "Let them," Owen replied. "You are just being neighborly to a stranger. Nothing wrong with that." Her cabin sat on the edge of town, a modest structure that had seen better days. The roof leaked in places, and the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, but she had kept it as clean and tidy as possible. Inside, it was sparse but neat. A small table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, a wood stove, and a few personal belongings. Owen removed his hat as he entered, his presence somehow making the small space feel even smaller. Nora busied herself cutting bread and cheese, acutely aware of him watching her. "Water is in the pitcher," she said, gesturing to the table. "Cups are there." They ate in a silence that was not quite comfortable but not uncomfortable either, more like 2 cautious animals circling each other. Owen devoured the simple meal like it was a feast, and Nora realized he probably had not eaten well in days. "When did you last have a real meal?" she asked. Owen wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Couple days ago in a town about 30 miles south. Money is running low, so I have been rationing." "What will you do? Find work, I suppose. I am good with horses, decent at ranch work. Figure I will ask around town, see if anyone is hiring." Nora considered this, considering him. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house mentioned her husband needs help with their horses. They keep a stable for travelers. Pay is not much, but it comes with a room and meals." Owen's eyes lit up. "You think they might take me on? I could introduce you. Mrs. Patterson owes me a favor. I took care of her when she had the fever last winter. You would do that for me. We only just met." Nora met his gaze steadily. "You helped me with the washing when you did not have to. Seems only fair to return the kindness." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. There was something forming between them, fragile as new ice on a winter pond, but undeniably present. A connection neither of them had expected to find. Owen reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. His palm was rough and warm, and Nora felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching across the scarred wood of her table, while outside the Arizona sun blazed down on Chloride and the future stretched out before them, uncertain but suddenly filled with possibility. Over the next few weeks, Owen became a fixture in Chloride. Mrs. Patterson had indeed hired him, and he proved himself to be exactly what he claimed, skilled with horses and willing to work hard. He fell into a routine, tending the stables from dawn until late afternoon, then finding reasons to pass by the river where Nora did her washing. Sometimes he helped her, sometimes they just talked, but gradually the walls they had both built around their hearts began to crumble. Nora found herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day, remembering the way he laughed at her dry observations about the town gossips, or how he always made sure she got home safely before dark. For his part, Owen discovered that the restlessness that had driven him from place to place for 5 years had quieted. He no longer woke with the urge to saddle Dusty and ride toward the horizon. Instead, he woke thinking about Nora's smile and planning excuses to see her. One evening in late August, as the heat finally began to break, Owen knocked on Nora's door carrying a basket. When she opened it, he grinned sheepishly. "Mrs. Patterson insisted I bring you some of her stew. She made too much, or so she claims, though I think she is playing matchmaker." Nora laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent. "She is not subtle about it. She asked me yesterday if I thought you were handsome." "What did you tell her?" Owen asked, stepping inside at her gesture. Nora busied herself getting bowls, but he could see the flush creeping up her neck. "I told her I had not noticed." "Liar," Owen said, but his tone was warm, teasing. She turned to face him, emboldened by the weeks of growing friendship. "Fine. Yes, I think you are handsome. Are you satisfied?" Owen set the basket down and crossed the small space between them in 2 strides. "Nora," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I need to tell you something. I am falling for you, maybe already have fallen. I know it is fast, and I know we are both carrying scars, but I have never felt this way before. Not even close." Nora's heart hammered in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, had felt the pull between them growing stronger every day, but hearing the words out loud made it real, made it something she had to respond to. "I am scared," she admitted. "My marriage was not a good one, Owen. My husband was not cruel exactly, but he was cold. Indifferent. I felt like I was just another possession to him, no different than his mining claim or his tools. What if I am not capable of being what you need?" Owen reached up and cupped her face gently in his hands. "You are not giving yourself enough credit. You are the strongest, kindest, most genuine person I have met in years. And I am not your late husband. I see you, Nora. Really see you. The way you help everyone in this town even when they barely pay you enough to survive. The way you push your hair back when you are thinking hard about something. The way you look at the mountains sometimes like you are trying to memorize them. I see all of it, and it makes me want to stay in one place for the first time since my family died." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, but they were not sad tears. "I am falling for you too," she whispered. "I was so lonely before you came, and now I cannot imagine going back to that." Owen leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Nora felt something inside her unlock, some frozen part of her heart beginning to thaw. She kissed him back with a hunger that surprised them both, months of loneliness and longing pouring into that single connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I am not going anywhere," he promised. "Not unless you tell me to." "Don't go," Nora said. "Please stay." That night they ate Mrs. Patterson's stew and talked until the candles burned low. Owen told her about his childhood in Texas, about the ranch his father had built from nothing, and how it had felt like the end of the world when fever took his entire family in the span of a week. Nora spoke about growing up in Kansas, about parents who had died when she was 17, leaving her alone and vulnerable. About accepting her late husband's proposal not out of love but out of desperation, out of fear of being completely alone in a harsh world. "We have both been running from loneliness," Owen observed as they sat close together at her small table, their hands intertwined. "Maybe it is time we stopped running." "What are you saying?" Nora asked, though her heart already knew. "I am saying I want to build something with you. A real life, a real home. I have saved most of what Patterson pays me. It is not much yet, but in a few months maybe I could afford to rent us a better place. Or we could save together, work toward buying some land. I know you need time. I know this is fast." But I also know I have never been more sure of anything." Nora looked at this man who had appeared by the river that day like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. Everything about this was improbable, but everything about life in the West was improbable. People carved homes out of desert, found silver in mountains, survived things that should have killed them. Maybe love could be improbable too. "I do not need as much time as you think," she said slowly. "I spent a year in a marriage that felt like being alone. I know the difference now. What I feel with you is real, Owen. It scares me because it matters so much, but that is exactly why I do not want to waste time pretending otherwise." Owen pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, horse and leather and something uniquely his own. They stayed like that until the candles guttered out, wrapped in each other's arms, while outside the night air finally cooled and the stars blazed overhead in the clear Arizona sky. The town of Chloride noticed the change, of course. In a place that small, nothing went unobserved. There was gossip, some of it kind, some less so. A few of the church ladies whispered that it was unseemly for a widow to take up with a drifter so soon after her husband's death. But most people saw what was obvious to anyone with eyes. Two lonely souls had found each other and were grabbing onto that connection with both hands. Owen and Nora began making plans. He took on extra work, helping with construction on the new church building and doing odd jobs around town. Nora took in more laundry and started baking bread to sell at the general store. Every penny they earned went into a jar that Nora kept hidden under a loose floorboard in her cabin. They were building towards something, and that shared goal gave their days purpose beyond mere survival. 3 months after they met, on a crisp November evening when the desert air finally held a hint of chill, Owen knocked on Nora's door with his hat in his hands and his heart in his throat. When she opened it, he dropped to one knee right there on her sagging porch. "I know I do not have much to offer," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "No fancy ring, no big house, no guarantees of an easy life. But I have these 2 hands and they are willing to work until they bleed to give you the life you deserve. I have this heart, and it is completely, utterly yours. Nora Grayson, would you marry me?" Nora looked down at him, this man who had washed away her loneliness by a river on a hot summer day and felt joy rise up in her like water from a spring. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, Owen Vance, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deeply and passionately, pouring everything he felt into it. When they broke apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver band. "It is not much," he said. "I had it made from silver or one of the miners gave me in trade for breaking his horse. But it is solid and it is real, like what I feel for you." Nora held out her hand and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. This was nothing like the cold transaction of her first marriage. This was real and raw and absolutely right. They married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband standing as witnesses. Nora wore a simple blue dress that Owen had bought for her with his savings, and Owen wore his only good shirt, scrubbed clean and pressed. The preacher was long-winded, but neither of them minded. They stood together holding hands, eyes locked on each other while he droned on about duty and commitment. When he finally pronounced them husband and wife, Owen swept Nora into his arms and kissed her to the applause and cheers of the small gathering of townspeople who had come to witness. That night, Owen carried Nora over the threshold of their cabin. It was still small and shabby, but they had cleaned it together and made it as comfortable as possible. Owen had built a new bed frame, and Nora had sewn new curtains from fabric she had traded for. It was theirs, truly theirs, and that made it beautiful. They came together that night with tenderness and passion, discovering each other by candlelight. Nora had never known it could be like this, gentle and fierce at once, full of laughter and whispered words of love. Owen worshipped her body like it was something precious, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, both breathing hard and glowing with satisfaction, Nora felt tears slip down her temples. "Did I hurt you?" Owen asked immediately, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her with concern. "No," Nora said, touching his face. "I am crying because I am happy, because I did not know this existed, because I am so grateful you stopped that day by the river." Owen kissed her tears away, then pulled her close against his chest. "Best decision I ever made," he murmured into her hair. "I love you, Nora Vance." "I love you too," she whispered back, the words feeling as natural as breathing. Winter came to the Arizona desert, bringing cold nights and the occasional frost. Owen and Nora settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked hard during the days, Owen at the stables and taking on additional work where he could find it, Nora with her washing and baking. But the evenings were theirs, and they treasured them. They would sit together after supper, Owen reading aloud from the newspapers that came through town, Nora mending or sewing. Sometimes they just talked, sharing memories and dreams, building a shared history one story at a time. In January of 1883, on a morning when frost sparkled on the windows, Nora woke feeling queasy. She made it outside just in time before her stomach rebelled. Owen found her there a few minutes later, pale and shaking. "What is wrong?" he asked, pulling her close. "Should I fetch the doctor?" Nora looked up at him, and despite her nausea, she was smiling. "I think I might be carrying our child," she said softly. Owen's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, fear, and then pure, unbridled joy. He whooped loudly enough to startle the chickens pecking in the yard and swung Nora around in a circle, only remembering to be gentle when she gasped. "A baby," he said wonderingly, dropping to his knees and pressing his ear against her still flat stomach. "We are having a baby." "We need to be smart about this," Nora said, running her fingers through his hair. "I cannot do heavy work much longer. We need to save more money, prepare." "We will," Owen promised, standing and cupping her face in his hands. "I will take care of everything. You just focus on staying healthy, keeping our baby safe." True to his word, Owen threw himself into work with renewed vigor. He took every job offered, working from before sunrise until after dark. It worried Nora to see him push himself so hard, but when she protested, he just kissed her and said, "You are giving me a family again. Let me do this. Let me provide for you both." Mrs. Patterson, who had become a good friend to Nora, helped in practical ways. She taught Nora how to sew baby clothes and gave her a bassinet that her own children had long since outgrown. Other women in town, even some who had gossiped about the quick courtship, warmed to the young couple. There was something about a coming baby that softened even the hardest hearts. By spring, Nora's belly had swelled noticeably, and Owen treated her like she was made of glass. He would not let her carry anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and fussed over her constantly. Nora found it endearing even when it was exasperating. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening when he tried to stop her from sweeping the floor. "I know that," Owen said, taking the broom from her anyway. "But I lost everyone once before. I cannot lose you. I cannot lose this baby, so let me fuss. It makes me feel like I have some control over keeping you both safe." The raw honesty in his voice made Nora's heart ache. She pulled him down to sit beside her on their bed and took his hand, placing it on her rounded belly. As if on cue, the baby kicked, strong and sure. Owen's eyes went wide with wonder. "Did you feel that?" Nora asked. Yes, Owen breathed. That is our child, alive and growing. And healthy, Nora added. I feel good, Owen, tired sometimes and my back aches, but the doctor says everything is progressing well. You do not need to be so afraid. Owen leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. I am trying. It is just hard when I love you both so much already. I know, Nora whispered. I am scared too sometimes, but we have to have faith that this will work out, that we will get to hold our baby and watch them grow up. They sat together in the gathering dusk, feeling the baby move between them, each lost in their own thoughts and prayers for the future. Summer returned to Chloride, and with it came heat that seemed to press down like a physical weight. Nora, now heavily pregnant, found it increasingly difficult to manage. Owen rigged up shade cloths around their cabin and spent his evenings fanning her while she lay on their bed, too uncomfortable to do much else. Tell me a story, Nora said one particularly sweltering evening. Tell me about Texas. Owen smiled and began to speak, painting pictures with his words of green pastures and cattle drives, of his mother's cooking and his sister's laughter. He spoke of the ranch his father had built, of morning rides and evening campfires. He spoke until Nora drifted off to sleep, her hand resting on her belly, and then he kept speaking softly, telling their unborn child about the family they came from and the family they were becoming. In late August, as Nora's time drew near, Owen became nearly unbearable in his anxiety. He checked on her constantly, barely slept, and jumped at every grimace or sigh. Nora bore it with patience, understanding that his fear came from love and old grief. The baby decided to arrive on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was rising. Nora woke to a gush of fluid and a cramping pain that took her breath away. Owen, who had been sleeping lightly beside her, was on his feet instantly. Is it time? He asked, his face going pale. Yes, Nora gasped as another contraction hit. Get Mrs. Patterson and the midwife. Owen ran like the devil himself was chasing him, pounding on doors and shouting until half the town was awake. Within 15 minutes, Mrs. Patterson and the midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Kent, had taken over Nora's cabin. Owen found himself banished to the porch, where he paced like a caged animal. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Inside the cabin, Nora labored with a strength she did not know she possessed. The pain was worse than anything she had imagined, wave after wave of it crashing over her until she thought she might break. But Mrs. Patterson held her hand and spoke encouragement, and Sarah Kent's calm competence kept her focused. You are doing beautifully, Sarah said as the afternoon sun began to slant through the windows. Just a bit more. Your baby is almost here. Nora bore down with everything she had, and then suddenly there was a release and a thin, wavering cry filled the cabin. She fell back against the pillows, exhausted and trembling, as Sarah lifted a squirming, red-faced infant. A boy, Sarah announced with a smile. A healthy baby boy. Mrs. Patterson went to the door and called to Owen. He burst inside, his face wild with hope and fear. When he saw Nora propped up in bed, holding a small bundle wrapped in clean cloth, he nearly fell to his knees. We have a son, Nora said, her voice hoarse but triumphant. Owen, come meet your son. Owen approached slowly as if in a dream. Nora pulled back the cloth to reveal a tiny, perfect face, eyes squinted shut, mouth working as if already searching for food. Owen reached out with one tentative finger and stroked the baby's cheek. The skin was impossibly soft, impossibly delicate. He is perfect, Owen whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Thank you for this gift. Nora was crying too. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Owen looked at his son, this tiny miracle who represented hope and new beginnings, and thought of his own father. "Thomas," he said, "after my father, Thomas Vance." "Thomas," Nora repeated, trying it out. "Tommy, yes, that is perfect." Sarah and Mrs. Patterson quietly cleaned up and prepared to leave, giving the new family privacy. Before she left, Sarah gave Owen instructions about caring for Nora and the baby, but Owen barely heard her. His entire world had narrowed to the two people in that bed. That night, after Nora had fed the baby and they had both fallen into exhausted sleep, Owen sat in the chair beside the bed and watched over them. He thought about the day he had seen Nora by the river, how close he had come to just riding past. If he had, he would have missed all of this, the love, the belonging, the family. His loneliness seemed like a lifetime ago, a different existence entirely. "I will keep you both safe," he promised quietly. "I will work hard and be a good father and husband. I will make sure you never want for anything." In the bed, as if hearing him even in sleep, Nora smiled. The first few months of parenthood were harder than either Owen or Nora had anticipated. Tommy was a colicky baby who cried more than he slept, and Nora, still recovering from childbirth, was exhausted. Owen tried to help as much as he could, walking the floor with his screaming son in the middle of the night, changing dirty diapers, doing whatever he could to ease Nora's burden. But they were both running on too little sleep and frayed nerves. It was during one particularly difficult night in October, when Tommy had been crying for hours and nothing seemed to help, that they nearly broke. Nora sat in their bed, tears streaming down her face as she tried once more to get the baby to nurse. "I cannot do this," she sobbed. "I am a terrible mother. Something is wrong with me." Owen, who had been about to snap from exhaustion, felt his frustration evaporate. He took Tommy from her gently and then pulled Nora against his chest with his free arm. "You are not a terrible mother. You are exhausted, and our son has a set of lungs that could wake the dead. That does not make you a failure. It makes you human. But what if I cannot give him what he needs?" Nora asked, her voice breaking. "Then we will figure it out together," Owen said firmly. "You, me, and this tiny tyrant. We are a family, Nora. That means we face the hard things together." As if Tommy had been waiting for his parents to unite, he suddenly stopped crying and latched on to nurse contentedly. The silence was so sudden and complete that both Owen and Nora started laughing, slightly hysterical with relief and exhaustion. "Little demon," Owen said fondly, looking down at his peacefully feeding son. "You just wanted to make sure we remembered to stick together, is that it?" They made it through those difficult early months by relying on each other and accepting help when it was offered. Mrs. Patterson would take Tommy for a few hours in the afternoons, so Nora could sleep. Sarah Kent checked in regularly to make sure Nora was healing properly, and gave advice about managing the colic. The community that had seemed so indifferent when Nora was alone had wrapped itself around the young family. By the time spring arrived again in 1884, Tommy had grown into a chubby, happy baby who smiled more than he cried. Owen had managed to save enough money that they could afford to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of town. It was not much, just a few acres with a well and some scrubby vegetation, but it was theirs. "We can build on it," Owen said as they stood on their property, Tommy balanced on his hip. "A real house, bigger than the cabin, with a room for Tommy and room for more children if we are blessed with them." Nora leaned against his side, looking out over their land. "More children," she said thoughtfully. "You want more, if you do," Owen said. "I know it was hard on you, the pregnancy and birth. If you want to stop at Tommy, I will understand." Nora turned to look at him, this man who had become her entire world. "I want more," she said. "Not right away. Let me recover. Let Tommy get a bit older. But yes, I want more children with you. I want to fill that house we are going to build with noise and laughter and love." Owen kissed her then, long and deep, while Tommy grabbed at his father's hair and babbled happily. Over the next 2 years, Owen built their house. He worked on it every spare moment, slowly but surely raising walls and putting on a roof. Other men from town helped when they could, and gradually the house took shape. It was modest but solid, with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a sitting room. When they finally moved in during the summer of 1886, Nora cried with joy. "It is beautiful," she said, walking through the rooms with Tommy toddling beside her. He was nearly 3 now, a sturdy little boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determined chin. "Owen, you built this with your own hands." "I built it for us," Owen corrected, "for our family." That night, after they had put Tommy to bed in his very own room, Owen and Nora lay together in their new bed in their new house. Nora curled against Owen's side, her hand tracing patterns on his chest. "I am pregnant again," she said quietly. Owen's hand stilled where it had been stroking her hair. "Are you sure?" "Yes. About 3 months along, I think. I wanted to be certain before I told you." Owen rolled so he was looking down at her, his face illuminated by moonlight streaming through the window. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," Nora admitted, "but also happy. Ready, I think. Tommy needs a sibling, and I want to do this again, knowing what to expect this time." Owen kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "We will do it together, just like before, and this time we have a proper house and more resources. It will be easier." "I love you," Nora said, pulling him closer. "I love the life we have built." "I love you too," Owen replied, "more than I ever thought possible." Their second child, a daughter they named Eleanor, arrived in the winter of 1887. Her birth was easier than Tommy's had been, and she was a calmer baby. Tommy was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to help with her, to hold her, and tell her stories. Watching her husband with their children, Nora felt her heart expand with love she had not known was possible. The years that followed were good ones. Owen's reputation as a skilled horseman spread, and he began breeding and training horses on their land in addition to his work at Patterson's stable. Nora took in less laundry now, focusing instead on their children and their home. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around and learning about horses. Eleanor was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit with her mother and learn to sew or help in the garden Nora had cultivated. In 1890, another daughter, Margaret, joined the family. And in 1893, a third daughter, Josephine, completed their family. Owen sometimes joked that he was hopelessly outnumbered by women in his household, but anyone could see he adored his daughters. He was gentle with them, patient, teaching them to ride and to care for the horses, treating them as capable humans rather than delicate ornaments. Nora watched him raise their children with love and respect, and she thought about how different her life might have been if he had not stopped that day by the river. On a warm evening in August of 1895, 13 years after they had met, Owen and Nora sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the Arizona desert. Their children were inside, Tommy helping his younger sisters with their schoolwork, the house filled with their chatter and laughter. "Do you ever think about that day?" Nora asked, her hand in Owen's. "The day we met, all the time," Owen admitted. "I think about how I almost did not stop, how different everything would be if I had just kept riding." "I think about it too," Nora said. "I was so lonely then. I thought that was just how life was going to be." Owen lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "And now," Nora smiled, looking at the house they had built, listening to their children's voices. Now I cannot imagine anything different. You did wash away my loneliness, Owen. You gave me everything I did not even know I was missing. You gave me a home, Owen replied. A reason to stop running. A family. You gave me back my life. They sat together as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Inside the house, Tommy called for them to come settle an argument about mathematics. They stood, hands still clasped, and went inside together to the life they had built from loneliness and courage and love. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of family life and the changing seasons of the desert. Tommy grew into a fine young man who decided to study law, leaving Chloride for school in Tucson when he turned 18. It was hard for Owen and Nora to watch their firstborn leave, but they were proud of his ambition and determination. Eleanor, quieter but no less strong-willed, announced at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher. She began working with the schoolteacher in Chloride, learning the profession while helping to educate the younger children in town. Margaret, artistic and dreamy, filled notebooks with drawings and spent hours capturing the stark beauty of the desert landscape on paper. Josephine, the youngest, was fierce and adventurous, always climbing trees and riding horses too fast, giving her parents gray hairs but also endless entertainment. Owen's horse breeding operation had become successful enough that buyers came from as far as California to purchase his animals. He had a gift for training even the most difficult horses, a patience and understanding that seemed almost mystical. Nora had expanded her garden into a small farm, selling vegetables and eggs in town. Together, they had built a comfortable life, not wealthy but secure. In the spring of 1902, as Nora approached her 43rd birthday, she and Owen sat together going over their accounts. The children were all occupied with their own activities, and the house was quiet for once. "We have done well," Owen said, looking at the numbers. "Better than I ever dreamed when I was a drifter with empty pockets." "We have been lucky," Nora replied, "and we have worked hard." "Mostly, we have had each other," Owen said, reaching for her hand. It was a gesture as natural as breathing after 20 years of marriage. "That has made all the difference." Nora squeezed his hand, looking at the man who had aged alongside her. His hair was more gray than brown now, and lines creased his face, but to her, he was as handsome as the day he had appeared by the river. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "About washing away my loneliness?" "I do," Owen said. "It was a bold thing to say. I surprised myself." "It was exactly the right thing to say," Nora told him, "because you did. You washed away my loneliness, Owen, and you replaced it with love and family and purpose. Everything good in my life came from that moment." Owen pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder as she had done countless times over the years. "Everything good in my life came from that moment too," he said quietly. "I was lost before I found you. You were my compass, pointing me toward home." They sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in memories and gratitude. Outside, the Arizona sun blazed down on the land they had made their own, and in the distance, they could hear Josephine's laughter as she raced one of the horses across the property. As the children grew into adults and began to leave home, Owen and Nora found themselves entering a new phase of life. Tommy returned from school and set up a law practice in Tucson, visiting regularly and bringing news of the changing world. Eleanor married a teacher from Phoenix in 1905, a kind man named Robert who treated her like a queen. They settled in a small town north of Chloride, and Eleanor wrote long letters to her mother describing her life and her work. Margaret's artistic talents had attracted the attention of a gallery owner in Santa Fe, and she left to pursue her art in 1907. It was hard to see her go so far away, but her letters were full of excitement and passion for her work. Josephine, true to her wild nature, married a rancher when she was 20 and moved to his property near the Mexican border. She gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, in 1908, making Owen and Nora grandparents for the first time. Holding his grandchildren for the first time, Owen felt overwhelmed with emotion. He thought about his own parents, who he had lost so young, and wished they could see what he had built. He thought about the years of drifting and loneliness, and how close he had come to missing all of this. "They are beautiful," he told Josephine, cradling the tiny babies with the same gentle care he had shown his own children. "Perfect." "They have your eyes, Papa," Josephine said. She looked tired but radiant, her husband standing proudly beside her. Nora sat in a chair nearby, watching her husband with their grandchildren, and felt tears of joy slip down her face. This was what she had never dared to dream of back when she was a lonely widow washing clothes by the river. Family. Legacy. Love that multiplied and grew with each generation. More grandchildren followed over the years. Tommy married a lawyer's daughter in 1910, and they had 3 children. Alina had 2 daughters. Margaret, when she was 35, shocked everyone by marrying a French artist she met in Santa Fe, and they had a son. The house Owen and Nora had built became the gathering place for family celebrations, filled with children's laughter and the chatter of multiple generations. As Owen and Nora entered their 60s, they began to slow down. Owen's hands, worn from decades of hard work, ached in the cold, and he could no longer train horses the way he once had. Nora's hair had gone completely white, and she moved more carefully, her joints protesting the years of labor. But they were together, and that made every ache and pain bearable. In the summer of 1920, the family gathered at the home place to celebrate Owen and Nora's 38th wedding anniversary. Children and grandchildren filled the house and spilled out into the yard. There was food and music and laughter, the kind of joyful chaos that comes from a large, loving family. As the sun began to set, Owen took Nora's hand and led her away from the crowd, down the path toward the river. They moved slowly, supporting each other over the uneven ground, until they reached the spot where they had met so many years before. "I wanted to come back here with you," Owen said, sitting on a flat rock and pulling Nora down beside him. "To remember." "As if I could forget," Nora said, but she was smiling. She looked at the water rushing past, unchanged by the decades, and thought about the young woman she had been. So sad, so alone, so certain that was all life had to offer. "I stopped here that day because you looked the way I felt," Owen said, echoing what he had told her all those years ago. "Lost, lonely, like you were just going through the motions of living rather than actually living." "I was," Nora admitted. "I did not know anything different was possible." Owen turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Nora Vance, you have been the greatest blessing of my life. Every good thing I have, every happy moment, every reason to wake up in the morning, it all comes back to you. To that moment when I decided to stop being a coward and reach out to another human being." "You were never a coward," Nora said fiercely. "You were brave enough to be vulnerable, to admit you were lonely and needed connection. That takes more courage than anything." "We saved each other," Owen said simply. "That is what we did. 2 broken people who found each other and decided to be whole together." Nora leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of all the years between that first meeting and this moment. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. "I love you," Nora said. "I have loved you from that first day, even when I was too scared to admit it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Owen replied, "with everything I am." They sat by the river as the sun set, just as they had on that first day, but everything was different now. They were not alone anymore. They had built a life, a family, a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. The sound of their grandchildren calling for them drifted down from the house, and they smiled at each other. Hand in hand, they made their way back up the path, toward the home they had built, toward the family that was their greatest achievement. Owen and Nora lived to see their children's children begin to have children of their own, becoming great-grandparents in their 70s. They watched the world change around them, Arizona transitioning from wild territory to established state, cars replacing horses on the roads, electricity coming to even small towns like Chloride. But some things did not change. Their love for each other remained constant, a touchstone in a shifting world. Every morning, Owen still reached for Nora's hand. Every evening they sat together and talked about their day. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they never went to bed angry. They had learned early on that life was too precious, too fragile to waste on pride or stubbornness. In the fall of 1925, Owen took sick with a fever. Nora nursed him carefully, but at 70 years old, his body was not as strong as it once was. He recovered but slowly, and afterward he was frailer, moving more carefully, tiring more easily. "I am getting old," he told Nora one evening as they sat on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "We both are," Nora replied. She was 66 now, her own body showing the wear of a long, full life. "I am not afraid of dying," Owen said, "but I am afraid of leaving you alone." Nora took his hand, holding it tightly. "We have had 43 years together, 43 years of love and family and happiness. Whatever time we have left, we will face it together. And when one of us goes, the other will carry on, surrounded by the family we created. We will never truly be alone again, Owen. We made sure of that." Owen nodded, comforted by her words. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the desert they had called home for so many decades. As it turned out, they had several more years together. Owen regained much of his strength, and they continued to live independently in their house, though their children urged them to consider moving to town where help was closer. But Owen and Nora were stubborn. This was their home, built with their own hands, and they intended to stay in it as long as they were able. In the spring of 1928, as Nora tended her garden on a warm April morning, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest. She sat down heavily, gasping for breath. Owen, working nearby with the horses, saw her collapse and ran to her side. "Nora," he said urgently, cradling her in his arms. "Nora, stay with me." She looked up at him, this man who had been her companion for 46 years, and managed a small smile despite the pain. "I am not going anywhere without you," she whispered. Owen yelled for help, and Tommy, who had been visiting with his family, came running. They got Nora inside and sent for the doctor, but even as they made her comfortable, they could all see that something fundamental had shifted. The doctor, when he arrived, confirmed what they feared. Nora's heart was failing for 3 days. Nora lingered, drifting in and out of consciousness. Owen never left her side, holding her hand, talking to her, reminding her of all the moments they had shared. Their children gathered, and one by one they said their goodbyes, tears streaming down their faces as they thanked their mother for the love and strength she had given them. On the 4th day, just as the sun was rising, Nora opened her eyes and looked directly at Owen. Her gaze was clear and focused. "You remember that day by the river?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Every detail," Owen replied, tears running down his weathered face. "Best day of my life." "Mine too," Nora said. "You washed away my loneliness just like you said you would." "You gave me everything, Owen, everything." You gave me everything too, Owen said, bringing her hand to his lips. I love you. I have loved you every day for 46 years. I love you too, Nora breathed. Wait for me, I will find you again. She closed her eyes then, and with Owen holding her hand and their children surrounding them, Nora Vance passed peacefully from the world she had known into whatever lay beyond. Owen's grief was profound and all-consuming. He had known this day would come eventually, but knowing and experiencing were two entirely different things. The house felt empty without Nora's presence, the silence oppressive. His children wanted him to come stay with them, to not be alone, but Owen refused. This is where we built our life, he told Tommy, where we raised you all, where every corner holds a memory of your mother. I am not leaving. He lived for 2 more years, tended by his children and grandchildren who took turns staying with him. He still moved through his routines, but there was a dimness to him now, as if the brightest part of him had gone with Nora. He spent hours sitting on the porch, looking toward the river, remembering. In the spring of 1930, on a morning that reminded him powerfully of the day he had met Nora, Owen woke knowing his time had come. He felt no fear, only a sense of rightness, of completion. He rose carefully, dressed in his best clothes, and walked slowly down to the river. Tommy found him there an hour later, sitting peacefully on the rock where he and Nora had first spoken, a slight smile on his face. He had passed quietly, looking out over the water that had brought him to the love of his life. They buried Owen beside Nora in the small cemetery outside Chloride, under a headstone that read Owen and Nora Vance, together forever. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, sharing stories of the love that had created and sustained their family. Tommy, speaking at his father's funeral, said, "My parents taught us what real love looks like. Not the easy kind, but the kind that chooses to show up every day, that works and sacrifices and never gives up." They were 2 lonely people who found each other by a river and decided to build something beautiful together. Everything we are, everything good in this family, comes from their love and their courage. The family maintained the house Owen had built for many years, using it for gatherings and celebrations. Eventually, it passed to Tommy's oldest son, who lived in it with his own family, keeping alive the legacy of love that had started with a lonely cowboy and a widow washing clothes by a river. The story of Owen and Nora became family legend, passed down through generations. Great-great-grandchildren who never met them grew up hearing about the day their ancestors stopped by a river and spoke words that changed 2 lives forever. About how loneliness can be washed away by courage and kindness, and how love, when it is real and true, builds something that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. Decades later, when the house Owen built finally grew too old and fragile to maintain, the family held one last gathering there before it was carefully dismantled. They stood together on the land that Owen and Nora had made their own. Dozens of people whose very existence proved that love could triumph over loneliness, that 2 broken people could create something whole and beautiful together. They walked down to the river, 5 generations of family, and someone read aloud from Nora's old journal, found preserved in a trunk. It was an entry from that first day, written that night after Owen had left her cabin. "Today a stranger stopped while I was washing clothes by the river. He said he wanted to wash away my loneliness too. I should have sent him away, but there was something in his eyes that spoke to the lonely parts of my own soul. I think perhaps I have been waiting for him without knowing it. I think perhaps this is the beginning of something I never dared to hope for." And below it, in Owen's handwriting, added years later when he had found the journal, "It was the beginning of everything. My darling Nora, you were always the beginning and end of my story." The moment I saw you by that river, my wandering stopped. I had found my home." The family scattered wildflowers on the river, a tribute to the love story that had started there so many years before. The water carried them away downstream, toward new places and new possibilities, just as Owen and Nora's love had flowed forward through time, creating ripples that touched lives they would never meet. In the end, it was not a story about a cowboy and a widow. It was a story about two human beings who had the courage to reach out across their loneliness and touch another soul. About how one moment of bravery can change not just one life, but generations of lives. About how love, when it is real and true and fought for every day, can wash away even the deepest loneliness and create something that endures forever. The river still flows past Chloride, Arizona, rushing over the same stones where Nora once knelt to wash clothes and Owen first stopped to offer help. The town has changed, grown smaller as people moved away, but the river remains constant. And on certain summer evenings, when the light hits just right, it is easy to imagine two young people meeting there, lonely souls reaching out to each other, beginning a love story that would echo through time.